Whaikuji ka khalsa, whaikuji ki fateh. Welcome to your Saheli, and on this episode we'll be discussing relationships, and with me I have three beautiful ladies. I have Supreme Sangera, who's a primary school teacher, Natasha Aylott, who's an author, a speaker, and Jasprit Ladwa, who's a credit risk analyst and also a mother. So are the other two. So we're here to discuss relationships and how they evolve over time. So, and also what we look for in a potential future partner, and then how relationships affect other relationships once we kind of go to this stage. So it's all relationships. So I'll go to Supreme first. Supreme?
Okay, if we're talking about relationships and how they evolved over time, looking at relationships when before it was a lot of extended families. So your families were bigger. You would probably live with your grandparents, uncles, aunts. That's the kind of family I grew up in, because we all lived on the same street, to be honest.
Yeah.
My uncles lived down the road, we lived up the road, my grandparents were there. Now, everyone's so involved in their own life, which isn't a bad thing. They're all involved in their own life, so you rarely see maybe your grandparents or your uncles and aunts, because everyone's self-absorbed in making themselves, go further. So your family now, you've probably got your children, your husband, maybe your in-laws. So that's a great change from when I was growing up to now me bringing up my family. It's just me, my kids and my husband. Not just saying that our values have changed or that there's less love or respect, because there isn't. It's just times have changed and priorities are different.
Absolutely.
Because you want to do well for yourself, but you want your children to do well. So your kind of priorities have changed.
Absolutely.
But then I think our elders, like our in-laws or our mum and dad, don't see it like that.
No, they
I
see
know
it from
in my
there.
example, my dad, my mother and father thought, well, you're kind of neglecting us, and you're not thinking about what we need.
Yeah.
And that did happen for a while, but then you have to come to a point and you think, well, I need to balance so that my parents, in-laws are getting what they need, my family are getting what they need. But that you need to grow up to do that. And it took me a while to kind of adjust. And I think I'm at a place now where I'm balanced, so I can do that.
And it's when you're balanced, everything flows, doesn't it?
Totally.
All the relationships kind of go the way you want to, all in alignment.
Because you have to put time into relationships.
Absolutely.
And without that time, that quality time that you spend on it, and it's the quality time. It's not you can spend loads of hours together, but if you're not spending that time talking to one another about the trivial things and talking to them about the things that really matter to you, it's communication. Communication in any relationship is a key. So yeah.
Did you find your relationships got better, so with the extended families, like your parents, your in-laws, once you had kids, because you wanted them to develop good relationships?
I think initially no. And I think, again, I need you to grow up. I mean, I've always had a good relationship with my parents. I'm not saying I haven't. And I've always had a good relationship with my in-laws as well. But I think it's expectations.
Yeah.
Because I didn't think about what they were expecting or what they wanted. I just had this lovely bundle of joy, and he was mine. I didn't want to share him with anybody, and it sounds really selfish, but that was he's mine, and I'm gonna spend this time with him. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. But then, they was their first grandson or grandchild, should I say? So they had expectations. I didn't think like that.
It's hard to think of their relationships, isn't it? You think of your own, your mother-child relationship, but not their grandchild, grandparent.
Yeah.
Interesting. But also, did you find, like, with your relationship, for example with your husband, did you feel like that's changed over time? So when you first got together, did you have certain wants, like a checklist of this is what I'm looking for in a husband, and now do you think that's changed as you've been married for?
Oh, totally. Like I've been with my husband before we were married. We were together for like 10 plus years, and now we've been married for 13 years.
And you were very young, weren't you, when you got together as well?
Yeah, I was very, very, very young. So absolutely, it's changed. He's changed. I've changed, and I think mostly I've changed because being the female going into a new family. I moved from Canada to come here, so I left my family behind. Okay, so then I started. And I moved into a new family. They had expectations, but I didn't know what the expectations were because I came from a smaller family. So there wasn't that expectation. I was the youngest in my family. Everyone did everything for me. And then you come into a family and then there's these expectations. You've got sister-in-laws, you've got brother-in-laws, you've got your mother-in-law, you've got your father-in-law, you've got all the extended family, and they're looking to you for something. But I didn't come up and provide it to them because I didn't really understand these relationships because I never had them.
Do you think you would have found those relationships easier to sort of get along with and develop if you were younger? Because when you're younger, you're a lot more
No.
adaptable and
I
you
think I
just
would
sort
have
of
found
get
it
on
harder.
with things. Oh, really?
I personally think I would have found it
Okay.
harder because I wouldn't have been ready. It's one thing when you've got your husband or you're dating someone and it's
Yeah.
the two of you.
Yeah.
And then it's opened up, and then you've got all this big family.
All eyes
and
on
it's
you.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just different.
It is.
And then they're like again back to expectations. I didn't realise what they were, and if I was younger, I probably would have been more naive and just carried on in my little road doing what I wanted to
not
do,
realised.
and not realising that all these people around me have an expectation of how I should be acting and what I should be doing.
So I know, like with
I was
Jazz,
just
you
gonna
got married when
say.
you were 18, and the things that you guys
It was the opposite,
with.
really, of what Saprin's just said, because I was 18 when I got married. It was an arranged marriage, and all I did most of the time was please the in-laws, do what they told me to do. And I think when you're so young, your in-laws can quite easily mold you to the way that they want you to be. And I found that we were spending less time with each other, but more with the extended family.
Yeah.
they were the relationships you
And
were
that was,
maintaining.
yeah, that wasn't too hard for me because I grew up in an extended family. So it's my parents, 5 of us, and then my auntie and my uncle, and they had 5 children. So I kind of grew up to that, and I thought, you know,
This
big
is the way
happy
it's meant to
families, this is
be.
the way it is. So I didn't have that many expectations as to where I need to spend time with my husband, I need to go out with him, you know, it's just us two. It was never just us two. Most of the time it was everybody, and we went to functions, we had to phone everybody to say, you know, we're going at such and such time. It's totally different to what it is now. And
But I think you're only 10 years, our age difference is just 10 years.
But I
So
got
what
married
a
at
difference.
18,
But then
yeah.
again, it was different because you had an arranged marriage. And obviously I knew my husband before I got married, so I'd already built up that relationship with him.
Yeah.
It's harder for you because you came into this marriage and you're trying to get to know your other half, but you're having to take on the families. I don't know, I do, because my sister got married after me. And the one thing I said to her is, all credit to you,
Yeah.
because I wouldn't know if I would be able to do this, to move to a new family, because you are. It's you're married, and the next day
Yeah.
you're in this new family, and all credit to her because she's done really well, and you know, and she lives with her in-laws, and they're fantastic. But it takes a strong woman,
Yeah.
a very strong woman, to be able to do that because you're trying to build those relationships with your husband. But at the same time, if you're living with your in-laws, you're trying to build it with those. But I think it takes a mutual respect. It has to come from both sides. So if she worked on it on her own, or if you worked on your own, it wouldn't have worked. So it has to be your husband working at it, also like your in-laws and yourself, which it takes a lot of commitment and for that all to
Yeah,
work.
it
for the family
does.
to
And
work.
accepting you for you, because it was totally different for me, whereas the rest of the extended family, they'd all been brought up and born in India. So their concept, their thinking, everything was totally different to mine. I was born here, raised here, and so a lot of the values that they had were really harsh and quite strict for me, although I adapted, but it was quite an eye-opener for me.
And see, these days, I'm not sure girls would adapt. They would just say, look, we're different people, we're not going to get along, let's be respectful, but keep our distance. Whereas in your day, you didn't really have that option, and
No, I
you
lived
just
with-
had to get on with it.
Yeah, I lived with them for 6 years.
Yeah.
And you just adapt and you just do everything together. And, you know, advantage to me by living together was at the time I didn't know how to do any Indian cooking. So if somebody had said to me, if I lived on my own and say there were guests coming and my husband had said, could you cook a 3-course meal, I wouldn't know what to do. But the advantage to that was my sister-in-law, who I lived with, she was 10 years older than me. So she would do that, and I was always a dessert queen, so I'd make the dessert.
There is a flip side to
Yeah, there
having
was a flip
extended
side.
family relations. Even when you have a baby, so, I mean, don't know if you guys felt this, but having a baby, that's when I really appreciated everybody so much more. Because
Yeah.
when you don't have all those hands on deck, it's so difficult to even get out the house with the baby. But if you've got mother-in-law, your mom and sister and people like that around, it makes life so much easier.
But you know, coming back to just a point you made, and you just said that this day and age, and you know, women wouldn't do that. It depends on your upbringing.
Yeah.
You're very fortunate the way you've been brought up to see everything's equal. Yeah.
Yeah.
The girls and boys are brought up equally, and everything's
Yeah.
the same. But it's not the same for everybody out there, because it
Yeah.
depends on your upbringing. And if you're instilled in you, this is the expectation, you're going to get married and this is going to happen, you don't know any different. So to you, that's what you want. You're all your life, you're going through education, doing what you're doing, but you're thinking, I'm going to get married and I'm going to be the perfect housewife. And it's not a bad thing. That is how they've been brought up, and that's what they think. So when we say, yeah, you know, we wouldn't want to do this, but our upbringing might be different to many people.
I agree with you, because mine was, you know, even it was totally different to Jaspreet's and totally different to yours. Whereas my father always said, once you get married, that's your home. You've got to make it work. You know, by hook or by crook, you've got to make it work. So that was kind of, you know, drilled into me, if you like. Natasha, what about you?
Totally different experience to me. I didn't have a whole entourage to help me with my babies. No, I was running a business full time, and my son came along, and it was like, thank goodness he slept for like 4 hours, pretty much in the morning and nearly 4 hours in the afternoon.
Oh,
so
wow.
I
So you
continued
could
to
do
work.
what you had to do.
I actually did both, which looking back wasn't the best thing. So I didn't have an arranged marriage. I got married much later. I was actually 33 when I got married. Certainly wouldn't have suited me at the age of 18, but my mother was 21 when she got married, you know, and so she'd done it the other way around. She had children and then she had a career, whereas it was the opposite for me. You know, I wanted to have, I had my independence. I had my first house, bought my first house when I was 19. I lived by myself.
Being
I loved
33,
it.
being independent, you're a woman who knew what you wanted
Well,
and knew what you were
no.
looking for. It's so hard to find that specific person who you've created.
Well, I don't know. I think I was ready at that point. I wasn't ready before, and you know,
You're lucky that you found what you were
previous
looking for.
suitors just knew that if they dared to ask that question, they'd get the old heave-ho. You know, that I wasn't even entertaining the idea. So for me, it was the last thing on my mind, marriage and children. But something just sort of seemed right and was there for me. So, and actually, my husband, after we got married, came up to live in my house. So again, so it was just the two of us, and then we bought a house together within a year and started a family. And I was working, and he was working. I was running a company. So yeah, I didn't have the help. And actually, it's interesting what you say, that you had lots of help and you really appreciated and valued it when you had your little one, because my mother was still working full time when my son was born. And you know, I remember her saying, when I retire in however many years it was, 3 or 4 years time, I will give you 1 day a week. And that was good, because she knew, she was very clear about what she wanted. So my relationship with my mother has always been a very healthy one, a very good one. At the same time, she's a very strong woman, a very independent woman. And once, you know, had 4 children. I was one of 4, and you know, had her career, and she has her life also. So my parents-in-law lived 100 miles away, so they couldn't help. So it was nursery, you know, for my children. So a whole different experience. So it's really interesting listening to your experiences. And actually, I have a huge amount of respect for both of you, for all of you, because I'm not quite sure how well I would have done if I'd have gone into a home that belonged to somebody else that wasn't my husband or mine. I'm a bit of a maverick, so there were, very challenging. And like you say, you would have to be a very strong woman to navigate around the relationships in a way that didn't cause angst and friction.
It depends on your partner, though. It's a lot to do. Like, I don't think I'd be where if my husband wasn't so supportive. He's very close to his family and he loves his family, but he's always put me first, and he's always put our kids first. And that's how we are where we're at because of him. But if it wasn't like that, I don't know if would have been able to do it, to be honest.
And the other side of like partners is it all depends on what their relationship's like with their family. So if they're not interested in their family, then
you can't build those relationships.
You can't, because they don't want you to. But if they are very close and they want you to, together you can sort of do it a lot easier.
Even though I didn't have my in-laws living with me or me living with them, they were wonderful people. Sadly, my father-in-law isn't anymore with us, but my mother-in-law is. And oh my goodness, they totally accepted me right from the start, and they were just so wonderful. And you know, we had a brilliant relationship right
the
from the
distance
start.
is actually good sometimes.
Well,
I agree with you.
there was that as well. And my mother, isn't an interfering mother. So, you know,
Yeah.
she was very accepting of my husband. They were very accepting of me.
Yeah.
And everybody got on really nicely.
Yeah.
So family events,
Yeah.
albeit that they weren't as frequent perhaps as because
Wasn't
you
as
don't-
stressful of her.
It was always something to look forward to.
Yeah.
That's what it should be.
And yet lots of my friends, you know, had tears around their weddings because
Yeah.
their mother was interfering or their mother-in-law was interfering and trying to have a say in it. Whereas we paid for our own wedding
Yeah.
and we had it just the way we wanted to. But we considered everybody else. You know, what about the children? What would we do for the children, other people's children? And what would we do for our relatives and our friends? And how would we make it so that everybody had a wonderful experience?
Good. I mean,
including us.
I think also the age thing is another reason
Yeah.
why you're probably so fortunate to be able to pay for your own wedding. So in the Asian culture, a lot of people used to, especially 10, 20 years ago, get married so young, at 18, 19, 20. Where are you going to find the funds to cater for a 500 people strong wedding?
Oh, yes. Well, I
Yes.
didn't have 500
Yeah.
at my wedding, so that would have been a
So
different
your
story.
family has a lot more input and say as to how things are going to go. And I think that puts a burden on your relationships during that time when you're wedding planning, because it's my wedding, but your mum's thinking, no, it's my daughter's wedding, and you know, your dad might be thinking it's my daughter's wedding. So everybody wants it their way, and it's just managing. And I think with that, the younger you are, I personally think the kind of easier it is,
yeah,
because
definitely
it's just you know, easier to be molded slightly. Whereas when you're more set in your ways, you're just like, no, this is the way I'm doing it.
My input to what Jasper's just said, I was 18, so I was just excited. I was going to get loads of clothes, I was going to get loads of jewellery, and you know, my dad was giving me money left, right and centre. I didn't know that he was trying to get rid of me.
Oh.
But you know, that's how it was done, and that's how we were, because when you're so young, it's like now, when my daughter got married, and when I met my son-in-law for the first time, we just clicked straight away, and I'm a mother-in-law, have a great relationship with him, which just makes everything easy. And when you've got respect in relationships, like we touched on, everything just flows better, and you appreciate each other, don't you?
Yeah.
It's acceptance as well, isn't it? Accepting that we are all different. And respect. I think it's so important in all relationships, not just
Absolutely.
intimate relationships or close family relationships, but all relationships, because we all have different views on things, and we all have different filters and perceptions and experiences that we bring to the table. So I think that's why God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth.
So what about with you, Sabrina? I mean, your mother-in-law, do you see her on a regular basis now, or do you have set days when you go and see her? How does
No, not really. When I first
your
got married,
in-laws, I should say.
like I said, I moved from Canada. So we initially lived with my mum and dad.
Right.
But it wasn't me that struggled, it was my husband that struggled living. The only reason being because he never lived with his mother-in-law, with his mum. He lived with his uncle,
Right.
which he called dad, and his
Right,
mum.
right. Oh, so that relationship wasn't that
he had a
strong?
stronger relationship with his uncle and his aunt than he did his mum and dad. I mean, he loves his mum and dad equally as he does, but he never lived with them. So it was for him. It was really weird because he lived in an extended family, so he had his cousins and his sisters and I can't I think there was 10 children in all growing up. So he came from a very big family, and so he then obviously sisters get married, everyone gets married, and the house gets smaller and smaller
Absolutely.
and smaller, and so he was not used to living with his mum and dad. I didn't find it difficult because I'd come from living with my parents, living with him. We always thought we'd move out and get a house of our own, but I didn't think it was going to happen so soon. So living with my in-laws, I find it fine. Like, just got on with it. It was like living with my mum and dad, and I actually think we had a better relationship then. And I think when I moved out, I don't know whether it was the fact that I was being blamed that I was taking her son away.
Of
I've got to say our relationship wasn't, and it never has been, as strong as it was when I lived with her. We do get on, but we don't. Like, I wouldn't say, she wouldn't talk to me about her all of her sorrows, and I wouldn't do the same either, because we don't have that relationship. And as in terms of seeing each other, we just see each other at functions now, because she lives around the corner.
Yeah.
She can come as she pleases, and
Absolutely.
I can. But everyone's busy.
And you're busy with
And
the
she's
children.
very dedicated to her going to the temple, and she
Good.
spends a lot of time there. So that's what she.
It's like it's kind of almost like the older generation. They expected their son to live with them after marriage, whereas my son's going to get married soon, and I have no expectations. If they want to live with me, fine, they can do. But if they don't want to, I wouldn't, really be upset about it, because I'd say that's absolutely fine. It's your life, your choice. and you just go along with those choices. And I think you actually have a better and a healthier relationship when things happen like this.
I think that's the Western mindset,
Yeah,
though, isn't
absolutely.
it? The Asian mindset is like, whether it's Indian, whether it's Chinese, is very much that your son will live with you and look after you in your older
Yeah.
age. And even though some people have adapted because they've been living in this country or been born and raised, like in your case, some still have that Indian mindset.
But less. It's getting less and less. I really do feel it's getting less and less. How did you find it, Jaspreet?
I think so we did stay with my in-laws for about 6 weeks or so when we first got married. We'd already bought our house and it was being done up. But like you said, my husband's relationship with his parents isn't the best, and so he found it difficult living there. He was the one who wanted to move. I was actually quite happy to live there.
Was he living there before?
He was, but he'd been to university.
Oh, so he was coming
lived
back
out.
there.
Yeah, he'd come back. So he'd had his independence, and he just wanted it back again as quickly as possible.
But do you think the fact that you only had like a 6-week window,
Maybe that's why it was so great.
It was like a holiday
Yeah,
almost, isn't
it
it? You
was.
know that there was an end.
Yeah.
That's
And
it,
there was a house
exactly.
ready, and you knew you were going to be moving,
Yeah,
so you made
it makes it
the
so much easier.
best of what you
But
had.
I think my father-in-law and mother-in-law both were upset when we left because they did want their sons to live with them, and because they're actually from India, so maybe they're one generation behind you and are still of that mindset that they think their sons should
And
live with
sometimes
them.
it's a pressure from the society.
Oh, yeah.
What is someone going to say?
Yeah.
And it's
What
that
are they gonna
expectation
say?
again, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
they had an expectation of, for example, myself and you to live with them, and you didn't fulfil that expectation. So then there's that pressure on that relationship. So you've gone into this marriage, but you're gone down there already because you're doing something that's not
exactly.
expected.
And I think a daughter-in-law relationship in an Asian family, this is really controversial, but you're always going to be the one who gets the blame. It's always going to be your fault over their son's fault, and I think that's just comes from a place of not thinking, but just from a mother's heart. It's not my son. It's always going to be.
Yeah, but it is
the
that way because anything
daughter-in-law.
goes wrong, it'll always be.
I'm sure they don't even
I'll get the
believe it
call,
themselves.
and they'll be like, you didn't do this, or this hasn't happened, and I'm just thinking, well, I wasn't meant to. It was meant to be your son. So I talked to him, but he'll never get the phone call. It'll always be me that gets the phone
Exactly.
call, and it'll always be me that this hasn't happened and this isn't done, and when you think, okay.
I think if that had been me, if I'm honest,
I was about to say,
it would have been a very short marriage. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it would have been a very short marriage because
But
the
what do you-
pressure of having to, living up to other people's expectations, that's like, wow.
Yeah.
Because, I have respect, obviously, for the older generation, for my family, for my husband's family, and they've had their time to bring up their family the way they choose. But to then put their expectations on the next generation when they are, like when you got married and when you got married,
Yeah.
starting out and starting with your own family,
Yeah.
you need to get to know your husband. I know you had already had a relationship with your husband anyway, but you need to be able to bond together and form that relationship together. And that's hard enough working that out, those dynamics.
It is.
Without having another sort of level
Yeah, and I think now,
of expectation
with all
put
of
on
us,
you.
we work so much harder. We're very career focused.
Absolutely.
Whereas the previous generations weren't. They worked so that they had enough money to survive and live a happy family life. Now we all want more than that. We want luxury. We want the best career. We want the best house, the best car. So that means we have less and less time to spend together. And that little amount of time we do have, we want to spend it with our husbands, our partners, or whoever it is, not necessarily all the time with our extended family. And so it is more difficult.
Unfortunately, our time's come to an end now. Are there any final words that you'd like to leave for our audience?
Well, I think respect is really important, and acceptance, whether you're
Totally.
the daughter, the son, the mother, the father, the in-laws, it's always really important to be yourself.
Absolutely.
And respect and honour other people and accept people for who they are.
Brilliant, thank you. Sabrine, anything from you?
I'd have to agree with that, and just to say that relationships, the main key is communication, and if people are communicating,
Absolutely.
they've got that respect for each other, and you've spent that quality time, that's it. That's
Thank you.
work.
No, I agree with these guys.
Thank you so much, ladies, for taking the time out to be here with us today. And thank you for the viewers for watching. And hopefully we'll be back very shortly with a new episode. Vaiguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaiguru Ji Ki Fateh.